Hi guys, and welcome to a new series on my channel where I look at franchises and see if I think their entries are underrated, overrated, or if I just generally agree with the critical consensus. So let's get on with it. This week we're doing the X-Men franchise. So, starting with the original X-Men, yeah, I think this one is really underrated. I think this is just such a fun adventure. I think people kind of consider this as a middle of the road sort of film, and it's certainly been forgotten over the years when talking about the great superhero films. But this was one of the big films that really kicked off the superhero renaissance, and yeah, I think the original X-Men is just a brilliant, fun adventure. No, it's not quite as good as X2, but yeah, I have a lot of fun with the original X-Men. Now, X-Men 2, I think, is very slightly overrated. Now, I do think it's better than the first X-Men, just about, but there are a couple of elements that do downgrade it slightly from what everyone else seems to think. So, I think, for example, the plotline with Stryker's son can get a little bit boring for me, and also I find that some of the stuff with Stryker kind of gets ruined when it gets put into context by X-Men Origins Wolverine, which, trust me, we'll get on to. Now, X-Men 3 for me is definitely an underrated pick. Now, it's not as good as either of the first two X-Men, but a lot of people just kind of really crap on this film, and I don't think it deserves it. Yes, it does botch the Phoenix Saga, but as I'm not a massive comic book reader, as a film, it doesn't really irritate me too much. I think there's quite a lot of fun action in the third X-Men film, so yeah, I do think this is slightly underrated. Now, X-Men Origins Wolverine, I don't care, this is overrated. I mean, everyone hates it, but I think this is the worst superhero film I've ever seen. I honestly do. I think X-Men Origins Wolverine has nothing good about it, apart from maybe the montage at the start, but even that is just okay. I don't award many points for a 5-minute montage, and the things they do to Deadpool, and the completely awful special effects and action, and the long, boring scenes, this film just does not work for me on any level, and I hate it with a passion, and I never want to have to sit through it again. Now, X-Men First Class, I think this is the pick I'm going to get the most hate for, and I think it's personally a bit overrated. I don't think it's a bad film, but I think I wouldn't classify it anymore as good or solid. I think overall, a big thing for me is that the film doesn't really matter in the continuity of the X-Men franchise. If you look at it in terms of the original trilogy, it doesn't really feel like it would lead anywhere. The characters really do feel out of place, especially with Mystique. And then with the Days of Future Past timeline, yeah, something's really wrong here because a lot of the characters just disappear. About half the characters just disappear in between films, and it just feels really jarring. So a lot of the work you do in First Class just feels wasted. Plus, that third act can get a little bit dull. I don't think that's a very good first act in my opinion. Then the Wolverine. For me, it's a shame, but it's another overrated pick. I think the Wolverine is fine. James Mangold did a much better job with Logan, but trust me, we'll get to that. I think there's a couple of bits of good action, but I don't think a couple of bits of good action can really elevate this too much. The third act is an absolute mess, and overall, I think the pacing of this is just slow, not in a good way. It isn't using its slow pace to give it anything interesting, it's just slow for the sake of slow. Now, Days of Future Past, I think I just agree with what everyone thinks about it. I think everyone thinks it's one of the greats. It's just a fantastic, fun adventure. It uses its time travel well. It mixes the old and new cast really well. It's lovely seeing Wolverine back again with a full X-Men cast. Yeah, I don't think you can complain about this film too much. It's pretty darn great. Now, Deadpool. Again, I think I agree with people on the way they see this. It's a fantastic film. I think some people do moan about the second act being a little bit too slow, the sort of parts where he's in the facility. And yeah, I kind of agree with that. But what this film does with its comedy and some of the action moments, I think the original Deadpool is great, and a lot of people agree. Now, personally for me, I think X-Men Apocolypse is an underrated film. I don't think it's fantastic, but yeah, I personally prefer Apocolypse over First Class. I just think, as an X-Men adventure, yeah, this is pretty great. Apocolypse, not so, but some of the stuff this film does with Magneto is absolutely brilliant. So yeah, I'm a really big fan of X-Men Apocalypse. Next is Logan, which is a film I think, however much I would love to say it's an underrated film, I think I've just got to say that I agree with the critical consensus, because I absolutely adore Logan, from the brilliant Oscar-worthy performances to the perfect pacing to some brilliant action moments and character development. But everyone thinks that. So however much I love this film and I'm desperate to say it's underrated, I've got to say I agree with the critical consensus. Next is Deadpool 2, and yeah, I'm going to say this is probably one of the most underrated X-Men films. Everyone kind of just puts this in the middle of a ranking list, and for me, it's probably second behind Logan. I think this is one of the funniest, if not the funniest, superhero film, fighting definitely with Thor Ragnarok for one of the funniest superhero films I've ever seen. The action is superb. They use their double budget perfectly here, and yeah, I personally think Deadpool 2 is absolutely incredible. Then finally we have Dark Phoenix, and I think I just agree with what everyone's been saying about it. I don't think it's absolutely terrible, but there isn't much redeeming about it. I mean, Mystique dies, so I think we can all be slightly happy about that. But apart from that, this just feels like the tag-alongs of a dying franchise, and this might have killed the brand slightly. I think the MCU is now kind of forced to wait at least 3 years, if not more like 5 years, to reboot this franchise, because people need to be allowed time to forget this film, and people need to be allowed time to get less connected to the cast and make sure that the MCU can come in with a bang. So that was my first ever episode of Overrated or Underrated. The next one will be a Pixar one with the release of Toy Story 4. Please like, please subscribe. I'm happy to have a chat with anyone in the comments, and thank you for watching.
This is Will and E, and if you're not already subscribed to the Nerdy Brit, right, you should be, right? If you're not, you're a loser too.